The lights of Station Orionis flickered in the darkness of space like a jewel floating between stars. The massive structure housed over 50,000 beings from across the galaxy. Traders, diplomats, smugglers, and workers all moved through its corridors, each with their own business to conduct. The station had one rule that everyone respected: no violence. Break that rule and every species in the galaxy would hunt you down. Katie Morrison wiped down the counter of the Starlight Diner for what felt like the 100th time that shift. Her feet ached and her back complained with every movement. She had been working for 12 hours straight, covering for her co-worker who had called in sick. Again. But Katie needed the money. Her little brother Danny required constant medical care back on Earth, and their insurance only covered half the costs. Every credit she earned went straight to those bills. The diner was quiet tonight. A few Vrel engineers sat in the corner booth, their insect-like bodies clustered around data pads as they argued in clicking sounds. An old Thalran merchant dozed near the window, his blue scales catching the artificial light. Katie moved between tables, refilling drinks and clearing plates. The work was simple, repetitive, and exactly what she needed right now. No complications, no drama. That changed when the station alarms began to chime. The sound was not an emergency alert. It was the ceremonial announcement that played when someone truly important arrived. Katie glanced up at the view screen mounted on the diner wall. Her stomach dropped when she saw the massive warship docking at the main port. The vessel was black as deep space, covered in armor plating that could withstand planet-killing weapons. She recognized the symbol emblazoned on its hull, the crest of the Drakari Empire. The Vrel engineers immediately stopped talking. The Thalran merchant jerked awake and quickly left credits on his table before hurrying out. Within minutes, the diner was empty except for Katie and old Henry, the cook who worked in the back. Katie watched through the window as station security rushed past, forming up in formal lines. Diplomats in fancy robes emerged from offices she did not even know existed. Someone really important just showed up, Henry called from the kitchen. He was human too, an older man who had been working stations for 30 years. You should probably close up early, kid. When the dragons come around, smart folks make themselves scarce. Katie nodded but did not move to lock the door. She had heard stories about the Drakari. Everyone in the galaxy had. They were the apex predators, the beings at the top of every food chain. A single Drakari warrior could take down 100 soldiers. Their empire controlled a quarter of known space, and no one dared challenge them. Dragons were not just strong. They were proud, ancient, and absolutely convinced of their own superiority. Humans, on the other hand, were barely a footnote in galactic history. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. Most aliens saw them as weak, fragile creatures who would probably wipe themselves out before becoming truly relevant. Katie had learned to ignore the dismissive comments and sneers. She kept her head down, did her job, and saved her money. That was all that mattered. An hour passed. Katie was preparing to actually close up when she heard a sound outside the diner. It was a strange noise, something between a whimper and a hiss. She moved to the door and looked out into the corridor. At first, she saw nothing. Then she noticed a small shape huddled against the wall about 20 feet away. It was a dragon, but not like the massive warriors she had seen in news feeds. This one was tiny, barely the size of a large dog. Its scales were deep purple, shimmering like oil on water. But something was wrong. The creature was breathing hard, its flanks heaving with effort. Its wings were pressed tight against its body and they looked strange, malformed, twisted. Katie glanced around. The corridor was empty. Whatever had happened, the little dragon was alone and clearly in distress. She knew she should probably call station security. Getting involved with a Drakari, even a small one, could lead to serious problems. But as she watched, the creature's legs buckled and it collapsed onto its side. Her training as a big sister kicked in before her common sense could stop her. Katie rushed forward and knelt beside the small dragon. Up close, she could see it was just a child. Its eyes were squeezed shut and it was making small sounds of pain. The station's artificial gravity was probably too strong for it. Or maybe it was sick. Katie did not know much about alien biology, but she knew distress when she saw it. "Hey there," she said softly. "It's okay. I've got you." She carefully slid her arms under the dragon child and lifted. It was heavier than she expected. Easily 60 or 70 pounds of solid muscle and bone. But Katie had been carrying Danny around since he got too weak to walk on his own. She knew how to lift without hurting herself or her passenger. The dragon's eyes opened in surprise, but it was too exhausted to resist. Katie carried the child into the diner and laid it gently on one of the padded benches. She grabbed her medical kit from behind the counter. The kit was basic, meant for human injuries, but she checked the dragon's breathing and pulse as best she could. Everything seemed stable. The child was just worn out. "Henry, get me some water," she called, "and maybe some of that meat from the cooler. I don't know what dragons eat, but it's worth a try." That was when she heard the footsteps. They were not normal footsteps. They were heavy, measured, and accompanied by the distinctive click of claws on metal. Katie looked up and saw two massive Drakari guards standing in the doorway. They wore black armor and carried weapons that could probably blow a hole through the station wall. Their reptilian faces were frozen in expressions of absolute horror. "Step away from the prince," one of them hissed. His voice was harsh, barely controlled. "Step away now, human." Katie blinked. "Prince?" She looked down at the small dragon sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, one tiny claw gripping her uniform shirt. "He collapsed in the hallway," Katie said, keeping her voice calm. "He needed help. I'm not hurting him, see? He's just resting." "You do not understand what you have done," the second guard said. His hand was shaking as it hovered over his weapon. "No one touches Imperial blood. No one. It is forbidden. It is law." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Katie realized with growing dread that she had just committed some kind of serious crime. But what was she supposed to have done? Let a child suffer in the corridor? That was not who she was. That was not how she was raised. Before she could respond, another figure appeared in the doorway. This one made the guards look like children. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scales black as midnight with veins of gold running through them. His eyes glowed with inner fire and power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. He wore robes that probably cost more than Katie would earn in her entire lifetime. On his head sat a crown of twisted metal that seemed to drink in the light around it. Emperor Vexthor had arrived, and Katie Morrison suddenly understood that her life was about to change forever. The silence in the diner was absolute. Even Henry had stopped moving in the kitchen. Katie could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as Emperor Vexthor stepped inside. His presence filled the small space like a physical force. The guards immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the floor. Katie knew she should probably do the same. Every instinct screamed at her to show respect, to apologize, to beg for mercy. But she could not move. The small dragon prince was still pressed against her shoulder, his breathing finally even and peaceful. If she knelt, she might wake him. She might cause him more distress. So instead, Katie stood her ground and met the Emperor's burning gaze. Vexthor stared at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, a mask of controlled fury that promised violence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous like distant thunder before a storm. "You dare touch my son?" It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, an accusation that carried the weight of a death sentence. Katie swallowed hard. Her mouth was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "He was hurt," she said simply. "He collapsed in the hallway. I could not just leave him there." "You could have called the guards," Vexthor said. Each word was precise, clipped. "You could have alerted station security. You could have done anything except lay your hands on Imperial blood." "There was no time," Katie replied. She shifted slightly, adjusting the prince's weight. "He needed help right away. I did what anyone would do." One of the guards made a choking sound. The Emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Anyone would do?" Vexthor repeated. "No. Anyone with sense would understand the laws that have governed the galaxy for 10,000 years. No one touches Drakari royalty, no one. The penalty for what you have done is death." Katie felt ice water run down her spine. She believed him. She could see it in his eyes, in the set of his jaw. This was not an empty threat. The Emperor was prepared to kill her right here, right now, for the crime of helping his child. It was insane. It was cruel. But she could also see something else in his face. Something deeper than anger. Fear. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Emperor Vexthor, ruler of a quarter of the galaxy, commander of fleets that could destroy planets, was afraid. Not of her. Of something else. Something she could not quite name. "Before you kill me," Katie said quietly, "can I at least put him down somewhere comfortable? He is still sleeping." Vexthor's eyes flicked to his son and his expression changed. Just for a moment, the mask slipped, and Katie saw something raw and painful underneath. The Emperor moved forward in 3 swift strides and looked down at the prince. Kareth was curled against Katie's shoulder, one small claw still gripping her shirt. His face was relaxed in a way that made him look even younger than he probably was. Peaceful. Content. When did he last sleep like that? Katie asked softly. The Emperor did not answer. He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched his son's head with one massive claw. The gesture was incredibly gentle, almost hesitant. Katie realized with a shock that she was seeing something private, something no one was supposed to witness. He does not sleep well, Vexthor finally said. His voice had lost some of its edge. He has not slept well in months. He is always in pain, always struggling, always aware that he is not like the others. Katie looked down at the prince and noticed for the first time how his wings were folded against his back. They were too small, the bones bent at wrong angles. This child would never fly like other dragons. In a species that valued strength and power above all else, he was born with a weakness that could never be hidden. His wings, Katie said. It was not a question. Malformed, Vexthor confirmed. The word came out like a curse. From birth. The physicians say there is nothing to be done. He will never fly. Never hunt. Never be a true Drakari. That is not true, Katie said before she could stop herself. The Emperor's head snapped up. His eyes blazed with renewed anger. You dare contradict me? I dare tell you the truth, Katie replied. Her fear was fading, replaced by a familiar frustration. She had heard this kind of talk before. From doctors who wrote off her brother. From relatives who suggested it would be kinder to let Danny die. From a society that measured worth in physical capability. Your son is sleeping peacefully for the first time in months because someone finally treated him like he mattered. Not despite his wings, but including them. He is still young. He is still learning. He is still a true Drakari because he is your son. The guards made sounds of protest, but Vexthor silenced them with a gesture. He studied Katie with new intensity, as if seeing her for the first time. You speak as if you know of such things, he said. Katie nodded. My brother Danny has a condition called muscular dystrophy. His muscles do not work right. He cannot walk anymore, cannot run, cannot do most of the things other kids his age can do. But that does not make him less than them. It just makes him different, and different is not wrong. The Drakari do not believe in weakness, Vexthor said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. We are apex predators. Survival of the strongest. Those who cannot fight, cannot hunt, cannot fly, they have no place in our society. Then your society is wrong, Katie said flatly. The temperature dropped again. The guards rose to their feet, hands on their weapons. But Katie was committed now. She might die in the next few seconds, but she would die speaking truth. My brother cannot walk, but he is the smartest person I know, she continued. He teaches me things about science and math that I never understood in school. He makes people laugh when they are sad. He remembers everyone's birthday and always knows the right thing to say when someone is hurting. He matters. Not because of what his body can do, but because of who he is. Your son matters too, not because of his wings or his strength, but because he is a person who deserves love and care and a chance to find his own path. Vexthor was silent for a long time. The only sound was the soft breathing of Prince Kareth. Finally, the Emperor spoke, and his voice was different, quieter, almost vulnerable. How does your brother find purpose? He asked. How does he live with the knowledge that he will never be what others are? Katie smiled sadly. He does not try to be what others are. He tries to be the best version of himself. And we help him. We adapt things so he can participate. We build tools and devices that make life easier. We do not hide him away or treat him like a burden. He is family. He is loved. That is enough. The Emperor looked at his sleeping son again. Something in his expression cracked, and Katie saw grief there, deep ancient grief that had been buried under duty and tradition and the weight of an empire. I have 12 children, Vexthor said quietly. All strong, all fierce, all perfect examples of Drakari might. And then there is Kareth, my youngest. My shame. He is not a shame, Katie said firmly. Look at him. He feels safe with me, a complete stranger, because I treated him with kindness. That tells me he does not get enough of that at home. He does not need you to hide him or fix him. He needs you to love him exactly as he is. Vexthor closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were still burning. but with a different kind of fire. Not anger, something closer to pain. "You have broken our oldest laws," he said, "but you have also shown me something I was afraid to see. I will not kill you, Katie Morrison. Instead, I will ask you a question. If I let you live, if I let you return to your life, will you tell anyone what you saw here tonight?" Katie looked down at the sleeping prince, then back at the Emperor. "I will tell people that I met a father who loves his son," she said. "Nothing more." Bexthor nodded slowly. He carefully gathered Kareth into his own arms, and the prince stirred but did not wake. The Emperor turned to leave, his guards falling in beside him. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for carrying my son when I was not there to do it myself." Then they were gone, leaving Katie alone in the empty diner with shaking hands and the certain knowledge that something had just changed. Something important. 3 weeks passed after the incident at the diner, and Katie tried to return to her normal life. She worked her shifts, sent money home to her family, and did her best not to think about the Dragon Emperor or his small broken son. But late at night, when the station was quiet and she was alone in her tiny quarters, she wondered what had happened to Prince Kareth. She wondered if he was sleeping better now. She wondered if his father had listened to anything she said. Then the messages started. The first one appeared on her personal datapad one evening after work. It was encrypted with technology far beyond anything humans possessed. When Katie opened it, the message was simple. How do humans care for their disabled? There was no signature, no identification. But Katie knew exactly who had sent it. She sat on her bed for a long time, staring at the question. She could ignore it. She could delete it and pretend she never saw it. But something in her refused to take the easy path. If there was even a chance she could help that little prince, she had to try. She wrote back, explaining about hospitals and physical therapy and assistive devices. She described how human society had laws protecting people with disabilities, how buildings were designed to be accessible, how children like Danny could go to school and have friends and live full lives. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The next message came 2 days later, then another, then another. Soon Katie was exchanging multiple messages each day with the anonymous sender. They asked detailed questions about human culture, human medicine, human philosophy. They wanted to know how humans justified spending so many resources on those who could not contribute economically. They wanted to understand why humans did not simply eliminate weakness from their population through selective breeding or euthanasia. Katie answered each question as honestly as she could. She explained that humans believed every person had inherent worth, regardless of their abilities. She described how her brother Danny had taught her more about courage and resilience than any able-bodied person ever could. She talked about how caring for the vulnerable made humans stronger as a species, not weaker, because it taught empathy and innovation. What Katie did not know was that Emperor Vexisthor was not just asking questions. He was conducting the most thorough research project of his long life. He had assigned his best intelligence officers to study human civilization in detail. They watched human broadcasts, analyzed human laws, interviewed human diplomats. What they discovered shocked every single one of them. Humans were weak by galactic standards. They had thin skin that tore easily. They could not breathe in most planetary atmospheres. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. They should have been extinct 1,000 times over. And yet they thrived. They spread across dozens of worlds. They built societies that welcomed billions. And they did it all while carrying their weakest members along with them. The intelligence reports landed on Vexthor's desk like bombs. He read about human hospitals that spent millions treating single patients. He learned about humans who volunteered their time to help strangers with disabilities. He discovered that humans actually celebrated their disabled members, giving them platforms to speak, opportunities to contribute, recognition for their achievements. It contradicted everything the Drakari believed about strength and survival. It made no logical sense, except that it clearly worked. Humans were not going extinct. They were growing stronger with each generation, not through physical might, but through collective adaptation and mutual support. Vexthor brought the reports to his advisors. The reaction was immediate and hostile. High General Zartok, a massive warrior with scales like armor plating, slammed his claw on the council table. "This is madness," Zartok growled. "Humans are prey species. They have no concept of true strength. We should not be learning from them." We should be conquering them. The humans have something we do not, Vexthor said quietly. They have a society where every member can find purpose, where weakness is not a death sentence, where parents do not have to hide their children in shame. The council chamber went silent. Everyone knew he was talking about Prince Kareth. It was the unspoken scandal that haunted the imperial family. The advisors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Your Majesty, said another counselor, an elderly dragon named Felnara, we understand your concern for the young prince, but our ways have served us for millennia. We are the apex predators of this galaxy because we are ruthless, because we do not tolerate weakness. If we start changing now, we will lose everything that makes us Drakari. And what exactly does it mean to be Drakari? Vexthor asked. Is it only about strength? Only about dominance? What happens when one of us is injured in battle? When age takes our flight? Do we simply die because we are no longer perfect? No one answered. The truth was uncomfortable. Elderly Drakari often withdrew from society, living in isolation until death claimed them. Warriors who lost limbs or wings in combat were quietly retired, their contributions forgotten. It was the way things had always been. But Vexthor was beginning to realize that tradition and wisdom were not always the same thing. Meanwhile, Katie continued her correspondence with the mysterious sender. She had no idea she was essentially giving philosophy lessons to one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She wrote about her brother's latest achievements. He had won a science competition despite his physical limitations. She shared stories about human inventors who created new technologies specifically to help disabled people, and how those technologies often ended up helping everyone. One message struck Vexthor particularly hard. Katie had written about a human saying, "A society should be judged not by how it treats its most powerful members, but by how it treats its most vulnerable." Vexthor read that line over and over. He thought about Kareth, hidden away in the private quarters of the palace, kept from public view like a shameful secret. He thought about other Drakari families who probably had similar secrets. He thought about all the potential that was being wasted because his people were too proud to adapt. The Emperor began making subtle changes. He ordered his physicians to research treatments for wing deformities. He quietly reached out to human medical companies, asking about their assistive technologies. He started bringing Kareth to private council meetings, letting his son sit in the corner and listen. The boy was smart, curious, and had insights that surprised even the oldest advisors. But these changes did not go unnoticed. General Zartok watched with growing alarm as his emperor became increasingly influenced by human ideas. The general was a traditionalist to his core. He believed that the Drakari Empire's strength came from its ruthlessness, its absolute commitment to power. Any deviation from that path was a sign of weakness that needed to be eliminated. Zartok began quietly gathering support among the more conservative factions. He spoke to military commanders who shared his concerns. He reminded them of the old ways, the proud heritage of the Drakari people. He painted a picture of an empire gone soft, corrupted by the poisonous ideology of prey species. The Emperor is compromised, Zartok told his inner circle one night. He has been bewitched by human sentiment. He speaks of caring for the weak, of changing our laws, of making our empire soft. This cannot stand. What do you propose? Asked one of his supporters, a younger commander named Dralkor. The source of this corruption must be removed, Zartok said carefully. The weak prince. He is the reason the Emperor has lost his way. As long as Kareth lives, Vexthor will continue down this dangerous path. But if the prince were to suffer an unfortunate accident, the Emperor would have no reason to pursue these human ideas. He could return to being the strong leader we need. The other conspirators shifted uncomfortably. Plotting against imperial blood was treason punishable by death. But Zartok was convincing. He argued that they would be saving the empire, not betraying it. That sometimes harsh measures were necessary to preserve what mattered most. They began to plan. Prince Kareth, for his part, knew nothing of the conspiracy forming against him. He only knew that his father had been different lately. Less distant, more patient. The Emperor had started spending time with him in the evenings, asking questions about what he learned from his tutors, listening to his thoughts and opinions. It was strange and wonderful and slightly terrifying. One evening, Vexthor showed Kareth something he had never seen before, the messages from Katie. He explained about the human waitress who had carried him when he collapsed, who had defended him to an emperor, who had challenged everything the Drakari believed about strength and worth. Kareth read the messages with growing wonder. Here was someone who understood what it felt like to be different, to struggle with things that came easily to others, to be judged as lesser because of circumstances beyond their control. But Katie did not wallow in despair. She spoke of her brother with pride and love. She talked about adaptation and creativity and finding new paths when old ones were blocked. "Can I write to her?" Kareth asked his father. "Can I tell her thank you?" Vexthor hesitated. He had kept his correspondence with Katie secret for precisely this reason. If others knew, if the conservative factions discovered he was taking advice from a human, it could destabilize his rule. But looking at his son's eager face, at the hope shining in his eyes, the Emperor could not say no. Yes. Vexthor Katie arrived at the Drakari homeworld 3 days later with 2 companions. Dr. Helen Porter was a physician who specialized in adaptive medicine for children. Greg Hamilton was an engineer who had spent 20 years designing mobility devices for people with physical disabilities. Both of them had volunteered immediately when Katie explained the situation. Both of them understood they might be walking into a political firestorm. The Imperial shuttle that picked them up from their transport was unlike anything Katie had ever seen. It was sleek and deadly, covered in weapons and armor plating. The pilot barely looked at them, his reptilian face expressionless. They flew in silence through the atmosphere of Draconis Prime, the Drakari homeworld. Through the viewport, Katie could see massive cities carved into mountain ranges, fortresses that looked like they could withstand sieges for centuries, forests where enormous creatures moved through the shadows. This was a warrior's world, harsh and unforgiving. The Imperial Palace was even more intimidating. It sprawled across an entire mountain, built from black stone that seemed to absorb light. Guards stood at every entrance, their scales gleaming like metal. Katie felt dozens of hostile eyes tracking them as they walked through corridors wide enough to accommodate adult dragons in full flight. No one spoke to them. No one smiled. The message was clear. Humans were not welcome here. Emperor Vexthor met them in a private chamber deep within the palace. He looked older than Katie remembered, lines of stress visible around his eyes. Prince Kareth sat beside him, watching the newcomers with a mixture of hope and fear. "Thank you for coming," Vexthor said. His voice was formal, but Katie heard the genuine gratitude underneath. "I know this is dangerous for you, but I did not know who else to ask. What happened?" Katie asked. "Your message said there was an attack." Vexthor's expression darkened. 2 days ago, there was a diplomatic reception. During the event, one of the aerial platforms malfunctioned. Kareth was standing on it when the supports gave way. He would have fallen 300 feet to the stone floor below. Katie's blood ran cold. How did he survive? "A member of the servant staff dove off another platform and caught him in mid-air," Vexthor said. "She is being treated for broken ribs and a shattered wing. She will never fly again, but she saved my son's life." Dr. Porter spoke up for the first time. "And you believe the malfunction was not an accident?" "I know it was not," Vexthor confirmed. The platform had been sabotaged. The investigation led back to soldiers under General Zartok's command. When confronted, the general did not deny his involvement. Instead, he challenged my fitness to rule. He claimed that my concern for a defective heir proves I am too weak to lead the Drakari Empire. "What kind of challenge?" Greg asked. "Trial by combat," Vexthor said grimly. "According to our oldest laws, any general may challenge the Emperor if they believe leadership has failed. The fight is to the death. It will take place in 10 days, broadcast across the entire empire. If I lose, Zartok becomes Emperor, and his first act will be to eliminate Kareth as a threat to proper Drakari values." Katie looked at the small prince. Kareth was trying to appear brave, but she could see the terror in his eyes. This child had just survived a murder attempt and now faced the possibility of losing his father and his own life. It was unconscionable. "Then we make sure you do not lose," Katie said firmly. "But more importantly, we show the Empire why Zartok is wrong. We prove that caring for Kareth does not make you weak. It makes you strong." Over the next week, Katie and her team worked around the clock. Dr. Porter examined Kareth thoroughly, taking detailed scans of his wing structure. The prognosis was not good. The bones had fused incorrectly during development, and the muscles had never developed proper strength. Traditional Drakari medicine had nothing to offer. The condition was permanent, but human medicine was not traditional. Greg designed a support harness that attached to Kareth's body, using lightweight composite materials that would not hinder movement. The harness had small mechanical assists built into the wing joints, powered by rechargeable batteries. It would not give Kareth true flight, but it would allow him to glide and strengthen his wing muscles gradually over time. The first time Kareth tried the harness, he cried. Not from pain, but from joy. For the first time in his life, he lifted off the ground under his own power. It was only a few feet, only for a few seconds, but it was real. He could glide from one platform to another. He could feel the wind under his wings. He was not completely grounded anymore. More importantly, Dr. Porter and Greg taught Kareth exercises to build strength, ways to adapt his movement to work with his limitations instead of against them. They showed him that disability did not mean inability. It just meant finding different paths to the same destinations. Word of the humans working in the palace spread quickly. Reactions were mixed. Some Drakari were curious, wanting to know more about these alien ideas. Others were hostile, seeing the entire enterprise as an insult to their culture. The conservative factions rallied around Zartok, praising him for standing up to human corruption. The general himself made several public speeches in the days before the combat trial. He spoke about the proud history of the Drakari people, about the importance of strength and dominance. He painted the Emperor as someone who had been deceived by weak prey species, someone who had forgotten what it meant to be a dragon. Vexthor coddles his defective offspring, Zartok declared to a crowd of supporters. He wastes imperial resources on a child who will never contribute to our empire. He listens to humans, being so weak they must build machines to do what we do naturally. Is this the leader you want? Is this the future of the Drakari? The crowd roared its approval. Many Drakari agreed with Zartok's position. Tradition was important to them. The old ways had made them powerful. Why change now? But there were others who watched Kareth learning to glide in his harness and wondered. They saw a child who had been written off as worthless suddenly finding purpose and joy. They saw an emperor willing to challenge tradition because he loved his son more than he feared judgment. Some of them began to question whether strength was really just about physical power, or if it might include other things, like courage, like love, like the willingness to adapt and grow. The day of the trial arrived too quickly. The combat arena was ancient, carved from solid rock and open to the sky. Thousands of Drakari filled the stands, with millions more watching via broadcast. Katie, Dr. Porter, and Greg were given seats in the Imperial box, where they could watch alongside Kareth. The prince was trembling, his claws gripping the stone railing. Emperor Vexthor entered the arena in full ceremonial armor, black scales gleaming in the sunlight. General Zartok stood opposite him, younger and larger, his body covered in battle scars that spoke of a lifetime of warfare. The contrast was clear. Vexthor looked like a king past his prime. Zartok looked like death itself. A herald announced the charges and the challenge. Emperor Vexthor was accused of weakness, of betraying Drakari values, of allowing human corruption to influence imperial policy. General Zartok had invoked the ancient right of trial by combat to determine who was fit to lead. The winner would rule. The loser would die. The fight began with a roar from both combatants. They launched into the air, wings beating powerfully, and collided in a shower of sparks where their claws met. The impact echoed through the arena like thunder. Katie grabbed Kareth's hand, holding tight as they watched two dragons try to kill each other in the name of tradition and pride. The battle was terrible to witness. Zartok fought with brutal efficiency, his movements honed by decades of warfare. He was faster than the Emperor, stronger, more aggressive. His claws tore through Vexthor's armor, drawing deep lines of golden blood. He used his superior flight to attack from above, diving down with devastating force before the Emperor could properly defend himself. Vexthor fought back, but age and years spent ruling instead of training had slowed him. Every dodge came a split second too late. Every counterattack fell short. The crowd began to sense what Katie already knew. The Emperor was losing. Unless something changed, Zartok would win. And when he did, Kareth would die. The prince beside her was shaking so hard his scales rattled. Katie put her arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. Dr. Porter looked ill. Greg had his eyes closed, unable to watch. This was wrong. This was barbaric. But there was nothing they could do. This was Drakari law, Drakari tradition. blood and death in the name of proving strength. Zartok landed a particularly vicious blow that sent Vexthor crashing into the arena floor. The impact cracked the stone. The Emperor struggled to rise, one wing hanging at an awkward angle. Blood poured from a dozen wounds. The general circled above, preparing for the killing strike. "Yield," Zartok called down. "Yield and I will make your death quick. Continue fighting and I will make it last for hours." Vexthor pushed himself to his feet, swaying but upright. "I will never yield to you," he said. His voice was weak, but the defiance in it was absolute. "You tried to murder my son. You think that makes you strong? It makes you a coward. Your son is a genetic failure," Zartok snarled. "He weakens our bloodline. He gives hope to other defectives who should have been culled at birth. Every moment he lives is an insult to what we are." The words hung in the air like poison. Katie felt Kareth flinch as if struck. This was what the prince had heard his entire life, spoken aloud or whispered behind closed doors. That he was wrong, that he was shameful, that he should not exist. Katie made a decision. She stood up, still holding Kareth's hand, and pulled him up with her. Before anyone could stop them, before she could second-guess the insane thing she was about to do, Katie led the prince to the edge of the Imperial box where everyone could see them. "That is enough," Katie shouted. Her voice was small compared to the dragon's, but in the shocked silence following Zartok's words it carried. "You want to talk about weakness? Let me tell you what real weakness looks like." Thousands of Drakari eyes turned to stare at her. Katie's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to back down. She had come too far, risked too much to stay silent now. "Real weakness is being so afraid of difference that you kill children," Katie continued. "Real weakness is needing to hurt others to feel powerful. Real weakness is following cruel traditions because you are too scared to imagine something better." Zartok turned his attention from the Emperor to the small human standing in the Imperial box. His expression was one of utter contempt. "What would you know of strength, prey creature? Your entire species exists only because we allow it." "I know that my species survived because we carried our weak with us," Katie shot back. "We did not abandon them. We did not kill them. We adapted. We innovated. We found ways to make our society work for everyone, not just the strongest. And you know what? It made us stronger. Not weaker, stronger." She pulled Kareth forward, and the prince stepped up beside her wearing his harness. His malformed wings were visible to everyone in the arena, broadcast to millions watching across the empire. The secret shame of the imperial family exposed for all to see. "Look at Prince Kareth," Katie said. "Yes, he cannot fly like you can. Yes, he was born different. But he is smart, he is kind. He has courage that most of you will never understand, because he faces challenges every day that you cannot imagine. And instead of helping him, instead of using your advanced technology and resources to make his life better, you wanted to kill him. You wanted to hide him, because his existence made you uncomfortable." Kareth was trembling, but he did not hide behind Katie. He stood straight, looking out at the crowd with his head held high. When he spoke, his young voice was clear and strong. "My father taught me something these past weeks," Kareth said. "He taught me that strength is not just about flying or fighting. Strength is about making hard choices. Strength is about protecting those who need protection. Strength is about being willing to change when change is needed." He looked directly at Zartok. "My father has more strength in one claw than you have in your entire body, General. Because he had the courage to question traditions that everyone else was too afraid to examine." The general's face contorted with rage. He launched himself toward the Imperial box, clearly intending to kill both the human and the prince who had humiliated him. But he never reached them. Emperor Vexthor, bleeding and battered, intercepted him in midair. The collision was devastating. Both dragons tumbled through the air, clawing and biting. But something had changed. Vexthor was no longer fighting to survive. He was fighting for his son, for the future, for the possibility that his empire could be something better than it was. The Emperor used techniques that Zartok did not expect. Instead of matching strength with strength, he adapted his movements, using the general's aggression against him. He fought smart rather than hard, conserving energy, striking at vulnerable points, making every move count. It was not the traditional Drakari fighting style. It was something new, something human in its emphasis on strategy over raw power. In the end, it was enough. Vexthor got his jaws around Zartok's throat and held on as the general thrashed and struggled. The fight left the general's body, his strength finally failing. The Emperor held the position for a long moment, giving Zartok every chance to yield. When the general finally went limp, Vexthor released him and let the body fall to the arena floor. The crowd was silent. Then slowly a sound began to build. It started with a few individuals, then spread like wildfire through the stands. Drakari roaring their approval, not for the death, but for what they had just witnessed. An emperor who fought for his son. A prince who refused to hide. A human who challenged their oldest beliefs. In the weeks that followed, the Drakari Empire began to transform. It was not immediate and it was not easy. Thousands of years of tradition did not change overnight, but the conversation had started. Families with disabled members began bringing them into public. Physicians started researching treatments instead of simply giving up. Engineers developed adaptive technologies. Laws were written to protect those who could not protect themselves. Emperor Vexthor established the first Drakari Medical Institute focused on accessibility and adaptation. He appointed Kareth as its symbolic head, showing the entire empire that his son had value and purpose. The prince, with his harness and his malformed wings, became a symbol of a new kind of strength. The strength to be different. The strength to need help. The strength to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Katie returned to Station Orionis, back to her job at the diner. But she was different now. She had stood before an empire and told them they were wrong. She had helped change an entire civilization's understanding of strength and weakness, and most importantly, she had saved a child who deserved to live. 6 months after the trial, Katie received a message. It was from Kareth, and it included a video. The prince was in a large training facility, wearing an improved version of his harness. As Katie watched, he launched himself from a platform and glided smoothly across the entire length of the room. His form was not perfect. He would never fly like other dragons, but he was flying in his own way, and the joy on his face was unmistakable. The message read, "Thank you for teaching us that different does not mean broken. I am training to become a diplomat. Father says the Empire needs someone who understands that true strength comes from including everyone, not excluding those who are different. I hope to see you again someday. Until then, I wanted you to know that you changed everything, not just for me, but for thousands of Drakari who were hiding in shame. We are not hiding anymore, we matter, and it is because of you." Katie smiled, tears running down her face. She thought about Danny back on Earth, fighting his own battles with muscular dystrophy. She thought about every person who had ever been told they were too weak, too broken, too different to matter. And she thought about how sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe was not strength or weapons or ancient traditions. Sometimes it was simply the courage to care.